Happy birthday, failure, my husband toasted. He announced our divorce in front of 52 people. I own the company IP. I just deleted it. $2 billion vanished. Taylor Miller is my name. On my birthday, my husband stood at the head of the long table, glass lifted, and grinned at 52 of his closest friends and coworkers in a private room at a fancy steakhouse downtown. He looked directly at me and said, "Congratulations, failure. We're done." The kind of laughing that comes from those who have been waiting for the punchline burst out of the room. The glasses made a clinking sound. There was a cheer. The woman he had been dating for almost a year sat at his right hand, her hand resting softly on his arm as though it were supposed to be there. I refrained from crying. I didn't get to my feet and yell. I just took one black envelope out of my bag and slid it over the gleaming wood in his direction. I continued, "Before you all celebrate," in a steady, low voice that made the crowd quiet enough to hear. I stood up, straightened my clothes, and left as the first phones rang. You might want to explain to your sisters why their tuition just vanished, to your parents why their house and cars disappear tonight, and to your partners why the firm collapses before the check arrives. Everything he had created began to fall apart at that point. But you have to know what it was like almost 10 years ago to comprehend how I got there and how I sat at that table with my heart oddly at ease. My mother worked triple shifts at the hospital to keep the lights on when my father passed away when I was a little child, and I grew up in a little Indiana town. Being quiet and intelligent kept you safe, I discovered early. It allowed you to observe, listen, and make sense of things before anyone realized you were there. I carried that silence with me into graduate school, where I immersed myself in statistics and coding to create models that could read market turbulence and uncover the underlying order. I got to know Atticus Hayes there. Like many ambitious guys, he was pleasant, full of huge goals, quick to offer compliments, and constantly focused on the next area he wanted to own. I trusted him when he spoke of creating something amazing together. When we got married, I believed that partnership meant that I should share the burden rather than bear it alone while he took the credit. We moved into a large suburban home outside of Chicago, the kind that exuded success long before you entered, with lofty windows and well-kept lawns. For more than 10 years, I got up early every morning to make his coffee the way he preferred, strong black, poured into the same mug at the ideal temperature. While he slept on his side of the bed, facing away from me, I spread out his clothing, ironed and immaculate. The mattress began to feel like a continent as the gap between us stretched by inches. During the day, I worked next to him at Hayes Advisory Group, the company he had started. I kept the predictive technique that underpinned every successful trade a secret from everyone in those glass offices. I had constructed it in our home office late at night. Atticus shook hands and shared stories about his vision while writing lines of code during dinners and golf outings. He was the genius in the eyes of the investors. He was the one who introduced me to me, and I grinned when he said, "My wife, Taylor. She handles the scheduling and keeps things running smoothly." During presentations, I filled coffee cups again. When he described my work in terms he had learned but never fully comprehended, I remained silent. Making myself tiny so he might feel large was what I long believed to be love. In retrospect, that was the first lie I let to persist in my mind. However, falsehoods carry weight, and they will ultimately begin to drag you down until your inner self decides you've had enough. A few months prior to my birthday, on a calm morning, the first significant crack developed. With a half-eaten piece of toast in one hand and his phone in the other, Atticus arrived downstairs already dressed for the day. He hardly looked at his coffee, even though I had placed it on the island as usual. He said, "I need you at the office early," while maintaining eye contact with the screen. "Big investor lunch. Make sure the conference room is ready." Of course, was my instinctive response. I didn't disclose that I had been working till almost dawn to improve the system that would entice those investors to continue funding us. My algorithm, which had been my silent preoccupation for more than 10 years, was able to identify patterns that others were blind to. It was the cause of Hayes Advisory Group's rapid expansion, the reason why Atticus's words were heard in rooms full of men wearing pricey clothes, but it was always his vision in his telling. I heard 3 of the more recent executives conversing in the hallway that afternoon as I was organizing folders in the conference room. "He's bringing in his old college friend as chief strategist," a person commented. "Big change is coming." The other said, "About time," and chuckled. "And what about her, still playing assistant?" Through the glass they were unable to see me. I felt the weight of being talked about like furniture that had outlived its usefulness as I stood there holding the leather portfolios. I discovered the folder later that week when I was backing up files at home, which Atticus insisted on for security. With the term reorg, it was buried deep. Drafts and updated organizational charts were found there, with Atticus at the top, his college pal prominent, and my name nowhere to be seen. Not in technology, not in operations, and not even in support. Following the resolution of some personal issues, a memo was issued on simplifying and eliminating superfluous roles. Private affairs. With the house quiet around me, I reclined in the desk chair and felt a chill creep into my chest. It seemed more like recognition than astonishment. I was now seeing the map, and the gradual degradation I had been sensing for more than 10 years had a destination. A few days later, I made the rare decision to have a peaceful lunch by myself at a cafe close to the office. When Atticus's helper Freya entered with an unknown woman, I had just placed my order. Behind me, they were seated at the table. I don't know why I pulled out my phone and started recording. I was thinking, perhaps a part of me knew already. Freya's voice carried that enthusiastic whisper individuals use when they're delivering something meaty. The birthday thing is all set, she added. Private room downtown. He wants it perfect. Her pal questioned, it's really happening then? Oh, absolutely. He's been planning this for nearly a year, moving things around, making sure she won't have a leg to stand on when it's done. Poor thing still thinks it's a celebration. They chuckled quietly. As Freya continued, I sat motionless, leaving my meal unopened. Everyone knows about Scarlett. Everyone except her. Her. Like a stone in quiet water, the name fell. Until the air became too thin to breathe, I traveled the city blocks and paid the bill with trembling hands. Atticus arrived home late that evening, with a slight perfume odor. After giving me an absent-minded cheek kiss, he made a beeline for the shower. I stood for a while in the kitchen with a glass of water that I never drank. I contacted Rachel Donovan, a former graduate school buddy who was now employed in forensic accounting, the following day. In Wicker Park, far from anyone who could know me, we met at a little bar. She listened as I filled her in on everything: the files, the conversation that was overheard, and the gradual disappearance of my contributions from business records. She leaned back and gave me a steady gaze after I was done. This isn't just a divorce, Taylor. This is a razor. He's not leaving you. He's planning to make sure no one ever remembers you were part of any of it. I nodded, allowing the reality to sink in. Something changed inside of me as I drove home that evening under the streetlights. Not anger just yet. A decision, something more subdued. To keep the peace, I had been invisible for more than 10 years. I would now defend what was mine by using that same invisibility. I wandered about our home like a shadow in the weeks that followed, going through the motions that had long characterized me. Morning coffee and perfectly organized folders. During family dinners at his parents' suburban home, he nods quietly. However, something was unfolding within, a silent determination that was like to awakening from a protracted, dreamless slumber. I began modestly. I locked myself in the upstairs guest bathroom late one night after Atticus had dozed off on the couch while still holding his phone. The door there clicked shut without a question, unlike any other area in the home. With my laptop balanced on my knees, I sat on the tub's edge and started assembling everything I needed. More than 10 years prior, I had acquired knowledge about secret structures, assisting his family with investments, safeguarding assets, and connecting things without anybody noticing. I now introspectively used that information. I established a number of silent businesses with names that merged with the surroundings and were registered in locations where paper traces vanished into the haze. They were locations to store what was really mine: the code, the ideas, the bits of myself I'd given away, but they weren't weapons yet. Over a roast dinner and wine they toasted like ambrosia one late evening at his parents' place. His father voiced his displeasure with the interest rates on their loan for the lake cottage. I had been moving food around on my plate more than I had been eating it when I looked up. I whispered, I know some people from my old network. They handle things like that. Better terms if you're interested. For the first time, his mother glanced at me as if I might have something interesting to share, and she raised an eyebrow. Really? What kind? Fair ones, I said, maintaining a steady tone. They fell for it for families like yours. The paperwork went through 10 days later, seemingly perfect but with tangled threads that only I could unravel. Subsequently, his sister's trusts were reorganized in the sake of tax savings. Without realizing the connections I had made during it all, they signed with their kisses and informal thanks. Everything would come undone with a single tug. It was more than just the mechanics, though. It was the burden of bearing it by yourself. Like a stone in my pocket that I couldn't put down. The secret got heavier every day. I saw that I was looking at old pictures on my phone. Back home, my mom and I were laughing over burnt toast in our small kitchen. She was so exhausted from giving so much and expecting so little that her face was lined with it. The facade I had been maintaining began to crumble when she called to announce that she would be paying me a visit. She pulled me into an embrace that smelt like home when she came on a wet afternoon with her baggage frayed at the edges. I was anxious, brushing my hair and looking over the counters for any indication of chaos when Atticus returned early from his shift at the office. After giving her a brief kiss that hardly touched her cheek, he informed her that he would be spending the weekend away with clients playing golf. She clasped my hand across the kitchen island as his automobile drew away. After he left the following morning, we sat with coffee and eggs while the sun shone through the windows. I took my time clearing the table for the first time in more than 10 years. Without raising her gaze from her dish, she inquired, "How long has he made you feel like this?" My fork was halfway to my mouth when I froze. Like what? Then, steadily and knowingly, she looked into my eyes. Like you have to earn your place in your own home. The words lingered, and then unexpectedly, hot tears fell. I told her about the papers I had discovered, the rumors about Scarlett, how my job had been taken away from me piece by piece, and how I had been working on something behind the scenes not for revenge, but because I couldn't let myself go entirely. After I finished speaking, she listened with her hand on mine and remained silent for a while. Your father's first marriage ended like this, she finally stated. She waited too long, thinking love meant enduring. By the end, she'd lost more than money, she'd lost her fire. She got up and dragged me along with her. Come on, we're packing what you need, just in case. We gathered necessities, documents I had copied, clothes that fit me, and little sums of cash throughout the afternoon. We concealed everything under boxes he never saw at the back of the basement closet. Before leaving, she gave me a firm hug and said, "You call when you're ready, I'll be here." The house felt more empty when she left, yet I felt stronger and fuller in some way. The blossoms came a few days later. Beautiful pink and white peonies were brought to the door. I didn't receive the card. Can't wait for your FGRMV. I contacted the florist, sounding happy as though I were confirming a purchase. They claimed to deliver to a hotel suite in the heart of the city every 2 weeks, during the previous 8 months. Feeling the remaining illusions fade, I placed the bouquet on the counter and gazed at it, with a sigh rather than a crash. As I lay awake next to him that night and listened to his steady breathing, I became aware that I was no longer angry. I was clear and prepared to make my own decision, even if it meant stepping through flames. My birthday night came like any other night, but behind it all was a faint hum, the realization that this was the last time I would have to pretend. Dresses that Atticus had chosen for me were spread out on the bed like play props. He said, "Wear something that fits the occasion," without looking directly at me. From the back of my closet, I selected the basic black one that I had purchased about 10 years prior to him, when clothing was more about how I felt than how I appeared next to him. He angled away from me as his phone lit up with texts as we drove silently downtown. When we exited the elevator, the private area of the steakhouse was already filled with conversations. 52 individuals, including all of his college pals, business partners, and their well-groomed spouses and girlfriends. No one from my world, no face that knew me other than the silent shadow of Atticus. With a hand on my back that felt more like steering than love, he led me inside. His place card shone at the head of the table. Scarlett Monroe was next to him, while mine was tucked away at the far end. As we walked in, she glanced up, her smile fleeting and sardonic, then returned her attention to the man next to her, Atticus's college friend, the man who would eventually replace me at the firm. His mother, who seemed to already know the script, gave me a pathetic air kiss on the cheek. I sat down with the younger wives, listening to their background discussion about trainers and trips. Wine was poured repeatedly, the meal took a long time, and I hardly tasted any of the courses. From his end, Atticus controlled the room, causing stories to flow and laughter to rise in response to his instructions. Scarlett made a silent notification by touching his sleeve at the appropriate times. They all watched and waited for the dessert, which was a rich chocolate confection with a single candle. Standing, Atticus tapped his glass. Immediately, the room fell silent. "I have something to share before we toast Taylor's birthday," he began, his eyes darting between us, his voice full of that practiced charm. The edges of the envelope were harsh against my fingers as I touched it in my purse. He turned to face me and said, "Congratulations, failure," with a smile that stopped short of his eyes. "We're finished." As though they had all been holding their breath for this, the loud, relieved laughing came like a tsunami. Glasses up. Applause rang out. Scarlett gave a gentle clap, her face triumphant. At first, I just breathed in the moment and let it to settle without moving. After that, I got up and moved along the table, my footsteps echoing in the unexpected silence. As I got closer, faces turned, a spark of bewilderment. With firm hands, I slipped the packet toward him. "Before you celebrate," I urged with a quiet voice, "explain to your sisters why their tuition just vanished, to your parents why their house and cars disappear tonight, and to your partners why the firm collapses before the check arrives." There was a dense, total quiet. Atticus's confidence shattered like thin ice as he gazed at the package and then at me. The door gently closed behind me as I turned and left. My phone vibrated once and then again in the lobby, but I continued to stroll out into the chilly night air, my heels clicking on the pavement as I made my way to my car parked across the street. I opened my laptop inside and saw my configured dashboard come to life. One by one, notices go off. Loans were called in, systems were locked down, money was frozen, everything was connected, and everything went according to plan. I could see the chaos unfolding through the restaurant's windows, with his father pacing while holding his ear to the phone and voices rising. Someone knocked a tray in their hurry, breaking glasses. I got the car started and headed to my condo, which I had purchased 7 months prior through one of my covert businesses, in the peaceful lakeside area. It had never occurred to Atticus. He assumed that my mother's house or budget hotels were where I spent my seldom nights away. It was a basic space with gentle lighting, books on shelves I had selected, and a view of the river that eased any remaining strain. As the confirmations came in, I sat at the table and made tea. The platform of the company went down first, with backups failing behind walls that I alone could access. Next came the notices from his parents, who were losing their lake house. The accounts of his sisters were locked, and their futures were on hold. I remained there in the silence for over a year, letting the structure I had constructed do its job while I ignored the deluge of calls. It was early on the 5th morning when the doorbell rang. I saw Atticus through the peephole, his eyes hollow, his outfit crumpled, and he was unshaven. Coffee in hand, I stood in the frame as I opened the door. "Please," he said, the word escaping him like an alien tongue. "Please, what?" "Everything's gone. The firm, my parents' place. The girls can't even access their accounts. Just tell me how to fix it." "Simply, you can't," I said. "This is what happens when you build on what isn't yours." He produced reams of accusations, a big envelope, and legal threats. With a small smile at the desperation, I turned through them. "You should go." His lawyers retaliated, but my lawyer, who had been preparing for almost a year, submitted evidence that proved his theft and transformed their threats into reality. Emails, recordings, and the real story of who created what. Then Scarlett appeared, seeming tiny without the polish, and gave him a drive with her own evidence, his insider information, and other items that would further bury him. She remarked, "I thought we could team up." I shook my head, but I took the drive. "I don't need to. But the investigators might." An emergency meeting was convened by the board. I was the one with the keys when I entered that glass room downtown, not the phantom wife. Around the table, they sat stiff. Overnight, Atticus grew older, his father deflated, and his friend useless at his side. The ownership web appeared when I plugged my laptop into the screen. As I observed them shifting, I replied, "Gentlemen, every component of the system you depend on is mine. It was developed prior to the firm and is patented under my name." One said, "What do you want?" I outlined the conditions. "I can sell it entirely to rivals, keep the majority ownership, or give them pieces." Within 90 minutes, they signed. A cadence of silent reconstruction dominated the days following the board meeting. I assumed the position that had always belonged to me. The creator, proprietor, and the brains behind the machine. However, my tenure at Hayes Advisory Group was brief. The echoes of meetings where I had poured coffee rather than facilitating them made the glass walls feel too much like the past. I made news in the business sections when I sold the core system to a rival. It was time to start over, not out of animosity. I used the money to start Bennett Strategic Analytics and rent a place downtown with a view of the lake. I carefully assembled the team, which consisted of ladies I had known for 10 years, all of whom were exceptional yet underappreciated. Isabella's models revolutionized risk analysis at a large bank, but her boss received the credit instead. Sloan, a programmer who had invented trading speeds, continued to work in entry-level positions. We collaborated side by side, ideas flowing freely, and each contribution was acknowledged. Within 10 days, our first client joined up after reading the article that finally revealed the truth about how I had built the system from the ground up and how it had been claimed and then reclaimed. There were others, yields rising higher than Atticus had attained. Then he disappeared from view. Scarlett's findings revealed insider movements, misrepresentations, and deeper inquiries. His business devolved into litigation and paperwork. His parents moved to a smaller home with his aunt after selling their lake mansion at a loss. In order to make up for what the trust could no longer provide, his sisters changed schools and took part-time jobs. I wasn't satisfied when I watched it. It was simply the natural conclusion of an edifice built on sand, the settling of a balance. Soon later, my mother paid me a visit. As she entered the new office, her eyes widened at the bustle of activity and the whiteboards covered in drawings and mathematics. She reached out and traced the letters, her hand calm but her breath catching, when she saw my name carved on the door, Taylor Miller, CEO. Her words were quiet. "You didn't just get through it," she added. "You made something beautiful from the pieces." For a moment, we stood there, silent laughter mingling with tears. Pride felt like something I held, not something I sought, for the first time in more than 10 years. He was working at a booth for a small advisory firm at a conference in the city half a year later. His suit was ill-fitting, and his smiles were forced as he spoke to people who hardly stopped. The air froze for a moment as our gazes locked. He turned to arrange unnecessary papers and averted his gaze first. I spoke in front of a packed house, explaining not only the technology but also the lesson it contained, that taking responsibility for your own worth begins on the inside. Using some of the money, I established a foundation, funding for quiet for women whose voices had been ignored. Legal assistance to safeguard their labor. Mentors to help them progress. The first awardees created businesses that revolutionized their industries, serving as a reminder that progress frequently starts in the shadows. My phone rang with a text from an unknown number one late evening as I stood by my office window, watching the lake turn silver.